It's a lovely-ish morning here in Wales, and thank you very much for attending the first session of the day that I'll be presenting. So, bit of a clickbait headline title on this one, but we'll go through exactly why I chose these words shortly. So, hi, my name's Barney. I am a senior consultant at Kellyo, one of the gold partners here at SQL Bits. We're a consultancy that looks after your remote DBA, data engineering, data analytics, data migrations around SQL Server and Microsoft Azure. I have a blog at Barnalytics. Yeah, that's just, I thought that was funny at the time, to be fair. So yeah, analytics with Barney. I've been working in business intelligence and now data engineering for well over 10, nearly 15 years. My current specialism is mainly around Databricks and data engineering with Databricks. So we'll go into that a little bit more as we go through. So, bit of an introduction. We've got a few headlines up there. So, data governance, you hear it everywhere these days. Everybody's talking about data governance, and there's a few very good reasons for this. Things like GDPR, all of this means that when you handle data, you need to know where it's come from, you need to know where it's going, and you need to know who's accessing it. Now, what we're going to be talking about in this session is the where's it come from, where's it going. So we're going to, well, I'm going to present how we integrate two really amazing data governance solutions that don't integrate very well natively. So Databricks' governance solution is called Unity Catalog. Really good. Full control over your data lakehouse estate. I'm still getting used to saying data lakehouse. But what Databricks have given us within Unity Catalog is the access control and the data lineage. I'm going to talk about that in a sec. Now, that's brilliant, but that's just Databricks specific. Microsoft, on the other hand, have their data governance solution, which is called Purview, and you may have heard of it, and usually heard of it and said, oh, that costs a lot. But what price do you actually pay for data governance? If you don't have data governance, you're going to be paying hefty fines if your data gets out there. Some really hefty fines. I mean, I can't remember. I think it's percentages in the tens of your annual revenue, not your profit, your revenue. So as a company, you can be hit massively with these fines if you leak data and you haven't shown that you had processes in place. Now, Purview enables scanning many, many sources, pretty much any source you can think of, and we'll come back to that. There are a lot of built-in connectors, including one for Databricks, but it's not as good as it says on the box, unfortunately. And why did I use this word bedfellows? So I got asked this. They work so well together. Databricks natively just tracking everything that's going on and handling all that access control. Purview handling all of your resources, be they in Azure, be they in AWS, Google Cloud, on premises. But when you join them together, you get the best of what Databricks have done with their solution in with the rest of your enterprise solution, which is Purview. And so I was trying to explain data lineage to my wife the other day. She's an accountant / auditor by trade, and in her early days she was a data analyst basically at British Airways. Now she'd do all her analysis in Excel, connecting to business object cubes and all of that, so she knows a pivot table really, really well. She knows Excel a hell of a lot better than I do. But I was asking her, so you've got like this measure or this column. How did you, back in the day, bear in mind this was a few years ago, how did you find out where the data for that column, calculation, etc. came from? And she was like, oh yeah, I just went to this guy. So she basically had a guy who was a data catalog. And so I was like, well, you see this diagram on the right? If you could highlight a column like I've highlighted what is their revenue on the right-hand side there, I can see that actually comes from the line item table and is made up of a few columns. So she was like, oh, that would have been really blooming useful. And this is coming from an auditor, you know, they audit everything. So data lineage is really, really useful. And I have a client at the moment who I'm migrating them onto Unity Catalog very shortly so that we can actually leverage this, because they have 5 different source systems, 2 of them, one for one country and one for the rest of the world, because that client merged 10 years ago, but they still haven't actually gotten to a global solution yet. So actually that data lineage is so super important to them, so that they, when they're doing their account C reporting, because we're dealing with things like their general ledger, we're dealing with their time tracking, which as a law firm, time tracking, I've come to learn, is even worse and even more important than when you're working in a consultancy. Obviously, lawyers bill by, I think they go down to about the 15-minute window. But it has to be so accurate. So this is where having the knowledge of where your data is coming from, where it's going to, is so important. And it's so important for, I would say, 100% of organizations out there. And I would say, in my knowledge, 99% of organizations out there don't know this information. It is, like my wife said, in the brain of somebody. It's not generally accessible. So what we're going to do today is show a bit of code, show how we extend the capabilities of Microsoft Purview. Now, under the hood, Microsoft Purview is based on Apache Atlas, which is an open source data governance solution, with a fancy GUI over the top. But one of the good things about Apache Atlas is it's extensible. You can create your own definitions in there. So let's see where we're at. Okay, so out of the box, Purview can scan Databricks workspaces. It says it does data lineage. It doesn't. It can actually map a storage account to a table definition, and that's it. That's all you're getting out of the box. And you need a self-hosted integration runtime with Java 11 installed. Not 8, not 18, 11. Don't ask me why. It just doesn't like any other version of Java. But does anybody like Java? No, that's a question. On top of this, Microsoft have a generic Spark lineage collector. It means going through a load of steps, installing libraries on your clusters, setting up function apps, storage accounts, loads of complicated steps that I never got to the end of and never got it working. But unfortunately, it only supports the default Hive metastore. Now, if you don't know Databricks or Spark, a metastore is, if we think about SQL Server and your three-level naming, it's the server. And then you have schemas and you have tables. But it only supports the default server within Databricks. It doesn't support all of that data you're protecting using Unity Catalog. So it doesn't integrate the two solutions very well. So what we can do, though, is, as I've said, Purview has the Apache Atlas API. Databricks have their CLI, which can integrate with Unity Catalog. So the background is, so if we were to recap a little bit, we have two data governance solutions. We want to be able to see everything in one place. We have some great APIs we can use. We have some quite severe limitations out of the box of trying to integrate them. Now, going through all of this, I started using the REST APIs. Does anybody here actually like using a REST API? I think not. So, there are a couple of amazing Python libraries. There's PyApache Atlas. Now, this is a wrapper around connecting to Apache Atlas with some really good information on actually how we can tweak how stuff is displayed in Purview, which we'll go through shortly. There are extended properties you can use. There's relationship types that make Purview show stuff like you really actually want to see it. So, enough waffling about what's going on behind the scenes, and let's cut over to a demo, because that's what we all like to see, and we hope that the demo gods are favoring us today. So, what I've done, and if you're not used to Databricks at all, we have a notebook here with a lovely hidden cell with secrets, which you really should never ever do. No, don't do that. So usually in Databricks, we use secret scopes, and we can pull secrets from Key Vault. But due to the wonderful way Microsoft gives you free credits and then kills your account, I had to rebuild this yesterday. So, yeah, good start. So, what we can see here at the top is some imports, and if you know Python, if you know any programming language, you have to reference your libraries. So, on the cluster we have PyApache Atlas, and we have Databricks CLI. So from them we need to import a few things to help us. And then with Microsoft Purview, we authenticate using service principal connection. So you need your client ID, client secret, and your tenant ID, like authenticating with most things in Microsoft. With Databricks, we actually use a personal access token, so that authenticates into a specific workspace. And then we have some definitions that I've created just because I thought it was a good idea at the time, to be honest. So what are we doing? Right. Now, as I said earlier, in Purview, you have a load of default definitions set up, but we want to create new definitions. So what is interesting is that we can actually create new definitions within Purview, within Apache Atlas API. There are a few different types of definitions. We have entities, which are objects, basically. We have relationship definitions, which are how those objects relate to each other. And then we have process definitions, which are how data moves. And we'll touch on each of them shortly. So I've gone through and created lots of definitions. I mean, this is a lot of stuff going on here. But what we have here is a definition for the metastore. And as I was saying earlier, this is like your server. This is the whole thing that pulls everything together. We then have our schemas, our tables, and we even actually create definitions for columns. And that's very important when we get to later on in the demo. So what we do is, from within this notebook, you can, if you don't know Databricks, you can run another notebook. And if you use the magic run command, that actually imports everything into the notebook you're running into that notebook from the other notebook. So all of those definitions that were in a different notebook, rather than taking up all of the page, they're now being imported. We now then need to upload these to Purview. So let's run that. Now, as you can see, the API is actually really quick. So this is good for in a little while. Now, let's just nip over to Purview. I created this Purview instance half an hour ago. For a very specific reason. I wanted to show you that there's nothing in here right now. Look, Purview doesn't have anything in it. But I've just uploaded those type definitions, but I can't see them. I can't see anything yet. But let's start scanning Databricks. Oh, get the right cell. So what we're going to do is scan for the metastores. Let's run that. And boom, we've now got something in here. But that's just a one thing. That's not really useful for what we're talking about today. But it's a start. You can see all the properties of it. We're starting to get there. So we then need to go through, list the catalogs, list the schemas, list the tables, get all of that. So let's start running them. Now, this is all well and good so far when it runs. So what this is doing is, in the background, it's connecting to the Unity Catalog API, going through, listing all those definitions, getting that all back, and then transmuting, is that a word? Transmuting that into the definitions required that we've previously created and uploading them to Purview. Now, Purview isn't instantaneous. It gets things occasionally. But what is interesting is we go to the properties of our metastore, and I've just hit refresh there. You see down here at the bottom, we have a related assets. Now, one thing that Microsoft does cheekily in the background for sources that they create is they create a hierarchy in these related tabs. Unfortunately, through the API at the moment, the Apache API, we're not able to create that sort of hierarchy. Maybe that'll come, maybe it won't, we'll see. So, but what we can do is it does show the related assets here. And this is because I've created relationships between the metastore, the catalog. So we've got a SQL bits lineage catalog. So it's a little bit clunky to navigate through. And we have our raw layer. Now, what have we got in raw? Oh, we've got some tables. Now, out of the box, Databricks has a lot of demo data sets, and one of them is the TPCH dataset. Now, if you're not aware of it, this is a standardized data set for performance benchmarking of data warehousing systems. You'll see on like LinkedIn that Databricks and Snowflake are always going at each other about these and talking about cost per query and all of this. But what's actually useful is it's built in Databricks. You can just import those data sets. So we have their base tables. Let's go to line item and you'll understand why shortly. So we have a table. Oh, that's good. We have some properties. And you can see here that you can even have key value pairs within your types, so that you can have nested objects. But what we also have, because of the way we've defined it, is a schema to this table. Now, if you connect to an Azure SQL table, or when you click on a column, this brings a pop-up. And anything else that you've defined your own, it brings you to a new page, so we just need to go back rather than just closing that pop-up window. So as you can see, there are things that Microsoft are doing under the hood with their own definitions that you can't replicate when you're creating your own source types. But what is really good is the next bit. So what we've got, one of the great things about TPCH dataset, and one of the reasons I chose it, is that they actually have, I think it's about 20, 25 queries, standard queries to test performance of systems. Now, this is brilliant because it means I don't have to try and type some load of random SQL queries, but I have these in a separate notebook. Let's go have a look at one of them. So we're going to execute some of these queries, and what they do is they create a load of new tables. So let's just run that. That took 40 seconds last time. Let's see how long it takes this time. So as I was explaining, what's really useful about TPCH for demos is that they give you queries, that they have aggregations, they have calculations, they have joins between tables. So it's got all of that going on in the background. Now, as I was saying earlier, and going back to the example of my wife, she was like, I was like, how do you know how that's calculated? Do you know where that sum comes from? You know, and she was like, well, yeah, I go talk to my guy. What if he's on leave? Well, I don't find out till he gets back off leave. Yep, we all know that sort of situation, shall we say. Now, we've started running a few of those. 54 seconds this time. So what we're going to now do is scan for those new tables. And using Databricks' medallion architecture, I've got my raw tables, raw/bronze, and I'm creating my silver tables here. And then you can go on to your gold presentation layer further on down the line and what have you. We're just going to go with a two-stage here. So I am now scanning the Unity Catalog API again, pulling in all these new tables that were created by that other notebook, uploading them to Purview. So if we go over to Purview again, we go back to our data catalog, we go browse, and by source type, we can see here we have new tables like query one. I've been really imaginative in the naming here. But it's also quite useful when you're doing something like this is, you know, actually naming them like that. So I now have my sources. I now have my sinks. But I don't have that relationship between the two that we need. So we now need to go back to the APIs, back to Unity Catalog, and extract this information and upload it to Purview. Now, within Purview, there are, off the top of my head, 2 different ways of creating lineage. Well, no, 3. So you can manually create your lineage, which if you want to map every column manually, feel free to do that. It'll take you a long time. Or we can upload them via what Purview call processes. And a process where if you think about connecting to, say, SSIS, ADF, a process is the pipeline that takes data from one place, puts it somewhere else, and potentially does transformations on the way through, which you'd have to use data flows in ADF to transform the data, but SSIS, well, I know and love. I'm not sure many people love it, but I do. I think it is possibly one of the best ETL tools out there to this day. And I don't think there's anything that's really properly done what it can do. But in Databricks, we're working with massive data sets. We have lots of notebooks that do transformations. We have all of this going on. Now, if we just go over to Unity Catalog now, in the Data Explorer, we can see the default Hive metastore, and we can see the new catalog that we've created, which has our raw and silver databases in, or schemas. They keep on changing what they call these things every 5 minutes. And within here, you've got the same information that I've populated Purview with, but we've got this lovely lineage graph where you can actually see sources and ends and map the columns. Now, wouldn't that be great to be able to see that in Purview alongside all your other systems that you're cataloging in there? Well, what I have just run in that previous notebook was the collection of that data. So there, we have upstream, downstream tables. But what we have, and you have to forgive me here, sometimes Purview doesn't actually bring up the lineage tag or tab for about 10-15 minutes sometimes. Sometimes you just have to go in to edit and cancel, and then suddenly, as you can see, the lineage tab comes up. Now, what we can see here is we have a source, a single table, a process that populates it, and the target. But what we can do is select, let's pick, we can see the average price comes from extended price. So we can actually start mapping the actual columns, and this goes back again to what I was talking about with my wife is, you know, let's show all the columns and you can just hover over and start seeing where they come from. Now that's great for one target table. Let's switch to the source table, because I've got a feeling this table might actually map to quite a lot of tables. Oh, look at that. It's in pretty much every table out there, or every target table. So I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit because Purview, lineage pane, not quite there yet. So we can start selecting columns from the source and seeing how many downstream columns that single source column actually affects, which is pretty damn cool if you ask me. Having this ability, you don't need to change your code in your notebooks. I just ran select statements to create those tables. You know, I didn't change my code at all, but it's captured by Unity Catalog. You have to have your tables within Unity Catalog for this metadata to be captured. Now, I just, you know, I just love this. This is sort of, to me, this is creating something that I think it must have been about 6 months ago. I was trying to create for a client. I was using some crazy Python library to scan all the SQL statements that we have stored in our metadata database, because we do metadata-driven development at Carrio. So we had all the SQL statements that we're running to do all this transformation, and then outputting it to list, putting it in Excel, giving it to the business analyst to then manually create all of this. Whereas, as you can see, I created this Purview workspace 45 minutes ago. And then during the course of this, I now actually have all that lineage. And this is a key concept that so many companies just don't understand that they need, but they do. Everybody really needs to have this sort of information at their fingertips, because that bloke, he's probably got 4 weeks of leave a year, so that's 4 weeks of the year. You've got nothing. And that's usually the case, is that all that information is stored away inside somebody's head, but not easily accessible to anybody else without approaching them. Now, there are obviously some limitations to doing things like this. You will have to schedule jobs periodically to extract this lineage information. Databricks only holds, I think it's 30 days worth of lineage information. So if I were to actually productionize this process, what I might do is pull back the lineage already stored within Purview and append to it, rather than just overwriting with the up to date definitions stored within Unity Catalog, until Microsoft allow us to extend the way you can upload information. You're going to be limited. So as I was mentioning, we don't have a proper hierarchy being shown within Purview, which is really frustrating. Really frustrating, because it's really great when you've got a SQL source. You can drill down through all the databases and you can see it in the hierarchy, rather than having to do that quite annoying scrolling down, seeing your related assets down at the bottom. But it's good. Again, I do hear so much of the time people saying, but Purview is expensive. But remember what I was saying earlier about how expensive not having a good data governance solution in place can potentially be to a business. You know, as a consultant, I would not be doing my job properly if I didn't help my clients work through this process and get a real good handle on their data. I would be very remiss if I didn't help them do this. And if you're working internally in a company and you know these sort of things, but you don't action them, again, it's what price do you pay and what jail times are potentially faced by your directors who are supposed to be looking after this. A few pounds on Purview might actually be worth it in the long run. You know, it's like business intelligence internally as a function doesn't generally actually make the business money, but it allows the business to see what's happening, to see what is making them money. Without that BI function in place, a lot of companies would not really know what is actually going on in their source systems. And trust me, you don't want to be hammering those source systems for your reports. Don't ask me how I know that one. So, yeah, I mean, what we've done today is we've gone through, we've discussed what data governance is, the two data governance systems that we've got in place, and why I like to call them Bedfellows, because they work so much better together. It's a really good relationship when you have them working together. Now, what's interesting is you could also extend this solution to actually push data back into Unity Catalog from Purview. So you start doing your classification, your organization-wide classification rules, start having Purview classify your data. you could then start pushing some of that information actually back in to Unity Catalog, and start actually creating access control lists and what have you by managing your data within Purview. I haven't tried that yet. Probably will work. Probably, well, you know. But yeah, what I just really found interesting when I got this to work is I just love being able to see this. Love being able to highlight columns like this. You know, that shows that this column is used everywhere. And until you've got, for me, something visual, it's really hard to understand the impact that a process that populates your extended price, if that goes wrong, all your reports are wrong. If the calculations that use that are wrong, it's affecting everything. So you need, it's kind of, you need to know what you don't know at the end of the day, because had I just seen the TPCH data set and the queries, I would not have known that line item was such a popular table. Now, one thing that we haven't actually looked at is how, no, not that one. Sorry, I just need to remember which query it is. What is really interesting about this lineage view is you can see that there's a couple of tables here that are grayed out. They don't have any source columns. But they're tables that have been joined to within that source SQL statement. So if we go back to, let's have a look at query 5. What we can see here is, don't shoot me, I didn't write this SQL, this is standard, so it'll run on most systems, so not the best. But we can see that we are actually selecting from customer and orders in the joins to create the SQL statement, but none of their columns are output, but it still records the fact that those tables are in that statement. Now, I think that's absolutely awesome, you know, because that actually shows something that you might not else have known, is that this is a, well, I call it a transient table, but it's a table that is being used, not outputting anything, but it is being used. And any changes to that table could break a lot of other stuff. So I just find all of this really pretty awesome. Sorry. You know, you can do so much on here. And I think before I started actually looking into this, I thought, oh, Purview, oh, data governance, oh, lots of cost. But having just actually played about with it and seeing how brilliant this is, having talked to my wife only this week about this presentation, I'm like, oh, so you're an auditor. Ah, you used to do a lot of data analysis. How would you have captured this information? And as I say, she spoke to a bloke. But that bloke will not always be there. But we can capture this automatically just by utilizing the tools available to us to then have such an awesome experience and such an awesome way of just viewing your data landscape. Now, there's potentially a lot of questions. I know I have questions I'd ask myself if I were sat where you are. So I'm going to leave up the feedback link and open the floor to any questions that anybody may have. Yeah.
Can you share the notebooks?
I will be publishing them, yes.
Where?
There's a very good question, probably on my blog, so I will publicize that. Yes.
Two questions, actually. Can you see what kind of transformations I've done on the source code? Like, now your wife can see that this query takes from this table, but what logic is applied in between?
Okay, so the question for those who are remote and couldn't hear, first question is, can you actually see those transformations and the logic that has been applied to those columns? Unfortunately, not at the moment. I'm not aware as to whether that'll be coming up in future iterations of Unity Catalog. But it is a very valid question, but just knowing that those columns are used, you can then start digging through your code and finding out what those transformations or aggregations are. You said you had a second question?
Yes. So regarding tables and rows,
Yep.
can you kind of show where they come from?
So,
You have a source system as well.
you can, and one of the things that I haven't quite worked out yet is how you link the source of the table back to, say you actually scan your storage account and linking them two together, because Unity Catalog, when it scans ADLS, actually presents the URL as a HTTPS URL, whereas Unity Catalog presents that as an ABFSS URL. So they're not quite the same, so you have to tweak them a little bit to actually match them up. But you could actually relate it to storage accounts and the actual underlying data folders with a bit of effort. Yeah?
Is there a way to back up or source control Purview? So once you've done any classifications, you put them in. What happens if somebody goes that way?
Yeah, very good question. So the question is, what is the backup and source control for Purview? Honest answer, I haven't got a clue. I don't believe there is anything that you can. What I like about pushing data in like this from, say, Unity Catalog is, as I say, I created that Purview workspace at 10 to 9 this morning, specifically for the demo. And it was nicely populated. But if you have spent a lot of time within Purview, you just have to trust Microsoft. Yeah. So, but in my experience, within Azure over the last 5 or so years, oh God, it's probably longer than that. Services will go down. But you don't tend to lose anything. That's my personal experience, but I'm sure there's people out here that have gone, yeah, no, we lost everything. So yeah, no, unfortunately, there is no versioning or source control for Purview. Any other questions? No? All right, well, thank you very much, and I hope you have learned something this morning. That's always my aim.